Hello, and welcome to week 36, which was actually last week, but I finished this book quite a bit ago. But, well, life has been complicated, so getting back to doing this has been difficult. But Mason and Dixon, that is the novel for today. And this is Pynchon's what, fifth novel? One, two, three, four. One, two, three, four, five. Fifth novel, published originally in published originally in 1997. And this is a first edition paperback, but I also have the first edition hardback. But I read the paperback through this time. They're exactly the same, I believe. I don't know of any real discrepancies or differences. Okay, so Mason and Dixon. Well, the two first things to know about this novel is one, it is a narrative within a narrative. It is a story of a old preacher named Reverend Cherrycoke who is talking about his life specifically as it relates to his connection to Mason and Dixon. Now, Mason and Dixon are the guys who were commissioned to draw the Mason-Dixon line, which is the straight line that goes between Pennsylvania and Maryland, but also to draw part of a straight line down into Maryland, I believe. Okay, so they were commissioned to draw a line that mostly went east-west, and they were commissioned to draw a line that went north-south, and I believe it was the one that goes down to Maryland, but I could be wrong about that, but I believe that is the case. Okay, and so that's the first thing to know is it is a embedded narrative. That's important. And the second thing to know is that Pynchon has chosen to write this in a style reminiscent of 18th century, about the period when this took place. So um, I'll show you the first page, and if you can read that, you see that it is capitalized oddly, and instead of ed, you have apostrophe d and things of that nature. And the vocabulary is not exactly what we would use today. So snowballs have flown their arcs, starred the sides of outbuildings as of cousins, carried hats away into the brisk wind off Delaware. The sleds are brought in, and their runners carefully dried and greased, shoes deposited in the back hall, a stockinged foot descent made upon the great kitchen in a purposeful dither since morning, punctuated by the ringing lids of various boilers and stewing pots, fragrant with pice spices, pilled fruits, suet, heated sugar, the children having all upon the fly, among rhythmic slaps of batter and spoon, coaxed and stolen what they might, proceed as upon each afternoon all the snowy advent to a comfortable room at the rear of the house, years since given over to their carefree assaults. That's the first sentence. And what's going on there is the beginning of Cherrycoke's narrative. That is the kids that Cherrycoke is talking to, assembling so he can begin his narrative about Mason and Dixon in that 18th century style. So those are two things to know about this novel before we even begin. Okay, so why are they important? Well, first of all, the 18th century diction is important because Pynchon is writing this period thing without knowledge of the present. And so these characters are trapped within their time period. And the language, I think, is meant to kind of reflect that. Because some of it is specifically geared to that time period. It's not language we would use for those same things now. Okay, so I think that's important in terms of setting the tone, that we're very much, immersing ourselves into this past. And the the meta-narrative, the narrative within a narrative that's happening, is important because there are a lot of crazy things that happen in this book, and Pynchon leaves it entirely up to the reader to consider how much of this is meant to be an invention by Cherry Coke, and how much of this is meant to be a fantastical narrative, an alternative history of sorts. And I think both of those contribute very strongly to that feeling that you're entering an alternative reality of some kind. Okay, so the book begins well before Mason and Dixon um, get to America, because they are trained scientific men of their period, and they had other jobs before this. They were involved in a transit of Venus, where they went and looked at, the transit of Venus across the sun. And they did other things. They've calibrated clocks and other things. As it turns out, Dixon is the surveyor person, and Mason is the astronomer, although both do both, obviously. But that is their unique skills. Okay, so what this book is about is partially this age of enlightenment in which things are discovered and categorized, where the different positions of the stars are enumerated. The transit of Venus is enumerated, and so they're getting a better idea of how far away Venus is, how fast it moves, exactly where it is in relationship to the sun, which also gives them a sense of how big the sun is. Also, this might relate to various other measures they might do, like the measure of light and measure speed of light and things of that nature. So that's the first thing. This age of experience, this age of exploration, this age of asking questions and learning about the world, enlightenment, and whatnot. And the second thing this relates to is the closing of mystery. Okay, so before enlightenment, before the scientific reason came along, people lived kind of like, with a lot of stories and myths and just a practicality of, well, this is what worked, so I'm going to do this again. Or this is what didn't work, so I won't do that again. Okay, so they lived a lot in that world, and not so much in the world of scientific discovery. Things were empirical in that way, in that testing way, but they weren't empirical in the testing experimental way that we've come to know science for. And what this does is it cuts down on the mystery. Oh, why does dew happen? Who knows? Now we have an idea. Now we know why. We can scientifically test our principles and determine why dew happens and things of that nature. Okay, and so crazy things happen in this book. There is a dog that talks, the learned English dog, LED, um, and other kind of crazy things that happen throughout the book. And what this book is about that scientific desire to draw a line. Okay, because nature doesn't know straight lines very much. Most of nature is curves and things of that nature. But we want an absolute straight line, a line of latitude, longitude, longitude. Okay, and that's important because the latitude and the longitude, or the longitude, whichever is which, I don't know which is which. Those determine your place on the Earth, so it maps the Earth. It's a Cartesian map of the Earth as well. And so that drawing that line is more than just that line. It also, in this case, happens to be a line between um, a slave state and a free state, and so they're literally drawing a line between freedom and slavery, and that's an issue that comes up again and again for these characters. And they're also drawing a line from civilization, on the edge of civilization, out into the western wilderness. So they're drawing this scientific line out into the mystery. And all of these things are what the book is about. and about how this comes about. Now, so if we now the actual plot of the book is these two characters, Mason and Dixon, who become good friends over the time of their being together. One of them is a Quaker. Uh, the other one was a former Quaker, I guess, and the other is kind of a free thinker. Comes from, I think, a Methodist background, but is not a practicing Methodist. One of them has, I think, a family at home. The other one, his wife has died, and so Mason's wife has died, Rebecca, and she visits him in visions throughout the book and things like this. There's a strong focus on family, just like there was in Vineland, but it's a different kind of family this time. And there's also a missing mother, free and easy in Vineland. Here, Rebecca, although free and easy has left, Rebecca has died. But there's the same questioning and wanting to know what the wife slash mother was up to, and what she's doing, because she comes back and visits from beyond the grave. Um, there's a lot of strange things that happen, but the whole point of it is that what does it mean when we start drawing these lines? And this is where, we're starting to get a sense of maybe Pynchon's larger project is it's about the when it all changed. What happened? How did modernity do this to us? And this book is his earliest direct exploration. Now, we've had some pieces in it in the Marit- Maritas episodes, and I think Gravity's Rainbow. We've had some bit in the South African bits and Namibia bits of V. We've had some pushing back into this, Slothrop's Protestant ancestors and that kind of thing. So we've had some echoes, some of this, and but this is the first time we're really going deeply, deeply, deeply. It's almost 800 pages deeply into this period and talking about basically the formation of America. Because it turns out this line they're drawing between the colonies is going to be irrelevant in just a few years because the American Revolution is going to overturn this, and Pennsylvania and Maryland, they're drawing a line between, will become two states in a larger pattern. So, in a larger group. So it doesn't really matter like they thought it was going to when they drew it. But, and that's kind of part of it too, is that they're spending all this energy. It took them like six to 9 years, I think, to draw this line, and is irrelevant. Now, what it means to draw this line, by the way, in reality, is they have to align with the stars, and they put a stake down and draw chains across the stake, and then they make what's called a visto or a visto. It's a line of cleared land, and what they do is they go from one side to the other and back and back and back and back and back. I don't know how many times, but each time they increase the visto they're making and remeasure and get more and more and more precise measures of where this line is supposed to be. And that is what they're doing. So they're actually literally scarring the earth. And that is part of what's going on here when you draw lines. And so that's the idea, is before life was chaotic and weird, and now we have put it on our Cartesian plane, and we've organized it, and we've scared off all the craziness, and we scared off all the spirit, all the soul of reality, and all we're left is the raw numbers. But Mason and Dixon are not meant to be bad guys by any means. I think they're meant to be good guys, like a lot of Pynchon's characters, caught up in systems they don't fully understand. They're just there doing their job, and not in the Nazi way of doing a job. They're just there doing their job. They're not causing any harm. They're not meaning any harm. They're just doing a scientific survey. It can be used for harm, but they're not the ones actually doing any harm. So, Pynchon's clear about that, I think, in that, the use of this is what becomes the problem. In any case, Mason and Dixon. It is a good book, a harder book than it looks like. It is not easy. to read, in part because of the diction. Pynchon messes with your head a lot with that cherry Coke versus Mason Dixon and whether or not something really happened or not. There are several cases where Cherry Cook says, "Well, I wasn't there, but this is what they said happened," or things of that nature. Or he'll tell you, like, certain places, one of them goes north, one of them goes south, and he'll tell you what happens. One goes south and one goes north, and he couldn't possibly have gone both places. So one of the two is clearly an invented narrative. Of course, the whole thing's an invented narrative by Pynchon, but you know what I mean. Within the fiction, it's an invented narrative. So, what ties this book all together and what all comes down to the end is the very end. Uh, Jeremiah Dixon goes down into Maryland and he sees some of the brutality of slavery firsthand, and it really bothers him. And that moment kind of echoes. That's very near the end of the book, and that kind of echoes back through the book, in that you know there's a moral imperative going on here. Slavery is wrong, and neither Mason nor Dixon have any doubts about that. Slavery is an evil, and Pynchon's clear about this too. Slavery is an evil, and this becomes a foundational problem for America. And this is one of the things that this book, I think, is looking at, is this foundational uh, wreckage of America through slavery being part of its beginnings, as well as pushing this line out into the West, the pushing back of the Indians and the territory the Indians depend upon. The very trees they cut down for this vista, become a problem. Um, and I think that is deeply involved here too, is this vision of America, which the book has in it, of spreading from sea to sea, even though they're not even a quarter of the way, not even a eighth of the way there. um, but that vision is kind of there in nascent form here, and so that's implied too, is how this line is just going to rip things apart. um, so, anyway, Mason and Dixon. I didn't really tell you much about the plot per se, because the plot is really them just wandering back and forth, and crazy things happen to them. They have some. They hire on all kinds of people, and so there's a big traveling band of people. There's a weird Jesuit plot where the Jesuits are maybe trying to find information from Dixon, and he's maybe a Jesuit agent, maybe not. I don't know. There's some craziness in it, but the basic plot really is just back and forth, back and forth, and that's a yo-yo. Pynchon loves yo-yos. Pynchon loves going back and forth, and there you go. So, good book. You should read it if you have a lot of time. All right.